All right, man, we're here with it. Part two, which is book two of The Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So let's get into it, man. So, book two is generally about like the rights and limitations of like power and stuff like that, kind of like how things are structured and things of that nature. So, and book two is broken down into 12 parts. But so in part one of book two is called The Sovereignty is Inalienable. And on page 32, he says, um, a general will doesn't need to be unanimous, but every vote needs to be counted. Um, and that's just him like laying the basis of how a general will should work. If you don't know what general will is the will of like the people, like as a whole. So it's like people in general. So he's saying, like I said, it don't for a decision to be made, everybody don't have to agree on the same thing, but everybody should vote. Um, then in part three, and this one is called whether the general will is fallible, and that if you don't know what fallible means, it means like if the general will is if they can make mistakes or not. Um, so I wrote down a couple of things from this part. Let's see. I wrote down about three things. So first, being that he says the general will is always right and it tends to the public advantage, but the deliberations of the people are not always equal and correct. Is that the people are never corrupt, but are often deceived. So it basically saying like when people are voting on something, they they're generally voting for what they feel like is in their best interest at the time. It's just that what they might think to be their best interest might not be right. So what they voting on what they want, but what they want might not be the best for them. Um, Next, I wrote, if people have good information and are separated, the decision will always be good. The small differences will equal the general will, but when factions or groups are created, the will of these groups is general is it is general, but it's partial to the whole. So let's say you have 100 people. If you separate those 100 people and let them vote on something, that will be like the most pure general of the will. But once you start having people click up, let's say you got a group of 30 people here, a group of 20 people here, a group of 15 people here. Um, whatever that group of people votes on is general to them, but it's biased to the whole with relation to whatever they feel or whatever views they have, which separates them as a group, which I thought was interesting, which is true. And lastly, from this part, he says, if one faction becomes too large, which is a group, there is no longer a sum of small differences, but a large single difference, which is solely particular. So let's say there's a group of people that is, you know, let's say you have a group of 40 people, let's say 50 people. Let's say 50 people out of those 100 agree on one thing, and then the other 50 people are split between like 4 or 5 different things. That group of 50 is going to be a lot more powerful than the rest of those people voting on those 4 or 5 different things because they are more in number and their bias will win over because they have, Next is part four, and this is titled "The Limits of Sovereign Power." And I wrote two things from this part. So the first thing being, if there is a new question, it is not fair to follow the general will because the decision would be partial to the other party. And that's on page 38. And let me go back into that. Page 38. See if I can find that particular line so I can expound on it, talk about it a little bit more. Page 38. In such a case, it would be absurd to oppose to refer the question to an express decision of the general will, which can be only the conclusion reached by one of the parties, and the consequence will be for the other party merely is an external and particular will inclined on this occasion. Just a particular will cannot stand for the general will, the general will. Wait. I read that wrong. That's why I was confused. Okay. It is not fair to follow the general rule. I left out a word. That's why I was going back in the book. I was kind of confused. But yeah, if there's a new question, it is not fair to follow the general will because the decision will be partial to the other party. Basically saying if somebody comes up with an idea or like something that they want to vote on or a different opinion, it's not fair to just overlook that and just go with what everybody else says. Like you have to give it some thought. I was kind of confused. I was like, what? Okay. So next. He says, it makes no sense to reject the sovereign and fight for yourself because you get less out of it with the greater risk. So basically, like, if you have the option to be with a group of people, it makes more sense to be with that group of people because as a whole, you'll be fighting for with the group, you'll be fighting for the same things for the group that you would fight for yourself. But you have more power, you have more resources on your side. Versus if you just go out on your own because all you have is yourself. So, in part 5, it's called the right of life and death. So, he says, every man has the right to risk his own life in order to preserve it. I just felt like that was a bar. I felt like that right there was a bar. Every man has the right to risk his own life in order to preserve it. You know what I'm saying? You got to take a risk to get rich. You did. But next he says, He who wills the end wills the means also, and the means must involve some risk and even some losses. Basically saying, if you want control over the end, you have to have control over the means in which you get to the end, and in having control over that, you assume the risk of like the failure and the losses that come along with whatever your end goal is. Next, he says, the citizen is no longer the judge of the dangers. Oh, wait. Okay, so that's page 41. Okay, I think it was a longer quote. I just didn't write the whole thing out because it was a lot. All right, page 41. The citizen is no longer the judge of dangers. Let's see. I should have wrote down the line too. But yeah, page 41. Go to here. Social. Yes. Where? Where is that line? People to ask questions. Preserve it. Then social treaty. Okay. It says, furthermore, the citizen is no longer the judge of dangers to which the law desires him to expose itself. And when the prince says to him, it is expedient for the state that you should die, he ought to die, because it is only on that condition that he has been living in security up to the present, because his life is no longer a mere bounty of nature, but a gift made conditionally to the state. Basically saying, if you're a part of the sovereign, like the state, well the sovereign, because the state and the sovereign are two different things. But if you're a part of it, then if these folks say, "Hey, bro, it's time for you to like," you know what I'm saying? Then you should do it without question, because you have been benefiting from this very same system up until this point. So it wouldn't be right for you to go along with it up until it adversely affects you. Like that's what you give up in, you know what I'm saying, in the relationship between the sovereignty. Like if you receive everything you get from it, when those rules and laws or whatever come about, then you should oblige without, you know what I'm saying, without any pushback. And then there was something I had made note of. I thought there was a contradiction in the death penalty of a murderer, but because you know how previously he said that, and I think I talked about this in part 1, but he says that like the sovereign can do no harm to itself, like just by nature, because to alienate one person, like a bunch of singular persons make up the whole, so you can't really do nothing to one person. And so when he was talking about the death penalty being put upon murderers, I was like, well, don't that go against what bruh said before about not punishing? But in the act that somebody murders another person, then they are no longer a member of the sovereign. They are then like an enemy. So it's okay to murder them, because the sovereign, by that law, the sovereign doesn't harm itself. It'll do no harm to itself. The sovereignty. So, yeah. Next in that same part, I wrote, it says, let us leave the questions. He says, let us leave these questions to because he was discussing like more about like the right and wrong ways to do things and like who deserves to have what done to them. And so he says, let us leave these questions to the just man who has never offended and will himself stand in no need of pardon. And that's basically like in the Bible when Jesus was like, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Like, you should leave that type of stuff up to people who have never done any wrong to decide what should happen to who. Next, he says, frequent punishment is a sign of weakness or remission on part of the government. And I feel like that's true. Like, even like let's move that. Let's make an analogy to like when you're raising kids. Like, if all you know how to do is beat your kids and yell at your kids, that just shows that you don't really know how to parent, or you don't really know how to guide someone. You know what I'm saying? You just result into the easiest thing to do, which shows a weakness in yourself. And next he says, the state has no right to put to death anyone whom it can leave alive without danger. And I feel that. Like, nobody should get the death penalty if them being alive doesn't really cause too much harm to anybody else. Next, part 6 is titled Law. So I wrote down a couple of things from here as well. And it says, the laws of justice are ineffective among men. They merely make good for the wicked and the undoing of the just, when the just man observes them towards everybody and nobody observes them towards him. This is why we need conventions and laws. So basically what he's saying is laws don't really do no good to somebody who's a follower of the law, because people who going to break the law are just going to break it anyway. So, and this actually is what I think Charleston White said this about how Louisiana, I think it was Louisiana, they made it so like just basically anybody can carry a gun. I don't remember the exact law. But he was saying how the law really protect people, because people who were going to break the law and carry guns illegally anywhere were already going to do it. So you really just giving the law-abiding citizen a fighting chance, because now they can carry a gun. Oh, that's what it was. I think it was like people like once you hit 18, you can carry a gun. So it really helps out law-abiding citizens because if I was a criminal, I was gonna carry a legal gun anyway. You feel me? So yeah. Um, Next it says laws are always general, meaning they can't decree privileges or social groups, etc. Uh, but but you can't appoint them to like a person in particular. You can only lay guidance. So what he's saying is you can't make laws that apply to specific people or groups of people, but you can you make laws general guidelines for things, and people will act accordingly to whatever they feel see fit. And then if the laws apply or rules apply, then they apply or not. Um, Next, it says, man cannot command law of his own motion. Therefore, every state that has laws is a republic. So what he's saying is like, as a people, you can't make laws for yourself. So you have to have a government, and having a government makes the body as a whole, the people in the government. That's the definition of a republic, having a government. So part 7 is titled "The Legislator," and so a couple of things from there. He says it would take a God to give man laws because the person giving the laws needs to be all-knowing of nature, yet be independent of the happiness of the people and the happiness of the people and their nature, and look forward to distant glory, meaning have a long enough outlook on things to see that it'll turn out good. Essentially. Next, he says, I wrote down, if great princes are rare, this is he said. He says, if great princes are rare, how much so are great legislators? Legislators being the people who administer law. He said, the legislator invents the machine while the prince makes it go. So the legislators make the laws, and the prince is basically the person who like enforces things, like actually controls things and moves things around, while the legislator just makes like the guidelines and things. Next, he says, he who has power of law should not have power over men, and vice versa. This leads to the minister of his own passions. I mean, so yeah, if you give somebody the power to say what should be and then make people do, then he basically has all power, and he'll start to act in his own inclinations and his own passions and what he feel like should go. As a singular person, which is partial, meaning opinionated. Next, these are some quotes. He says, wise men, if they try to speak their language to the common herd instead of its own people, cannot possibly make themselves understood. Basically, if you up here and you trying to explain to people down here, you like they ain't not gonna feel you. You got to talk to people on your level, gang. That's all he's saying. Next, he says, he whose knowledge goes no further may perhaps gather around him a band of fools, but he will never find an empire, and his extravagancies will perish with him. I'm going to say that again. He whose knowledge goes no further may perhaps gather around him a band of fools, but he will never found an empire, and his extravagancies will perish with him. I'm gonna let that one simmer. I'm gonna let that one sit there. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna let that one sit there. All right. So parts 8, 9, and 10 are all titled "The People." So it's the people, then the people continue, then the people more continue. And let's see what we had on time. Oh, we only had 20 minutes. Yeah, that's great. So he says, nature sets the bounds to the stature of a well-made man, and outside of that creates giants and dwarfs. As it permits to government, is neither too large for good government or too small for self-maintenance. So basically, like you gotta have like the right size government for whatever you got going on, or else if like I say if it's too big, they're gonna be too. It's not gonna be a good government, and if it's too small, then it really won't be able to control anything. Sorry, excuse my grammar. Now he says when resources are scarce, the state is always on the eve of destruction. That's self-explanatory. He says now people have less affection to its rulers if they never see him. And I thought that was interesting because Mr. Beast was talking about. I think he wants to make a candy, and he said he wants to be better than like the Mars family or like the Hershey's family or something like that. And everybody knows the Mars bar. The Mars owns a lot of different candies. I would put it out on my phone, but I'm using my phone to record this. But and the people the interview with him was like, well, how are you gonna do that? And Mr. Beast said, think about it. When was the last time you saw the Mars family? And I thought about it. I was like, I don't know what them fuckers look like. So, and he's just like, my people see me every day. So, I just thought that was interesting. I caught that while I was reading. I remembered that he said that. I thought that was something super, super interesting. I just want to put that out there. Next, he says the same laws that suit so many diverse provinces with different customs and different. Wait, what is it? Okay, the same laws cannot suit so many diverse provinces with different cultures. Is that and different laws only lead to trouble and confusion among the people. So basically, if you got like a wide area of different kinds of people, they all can't follow the same laws. But if you have too many different laws with like a smaller set of people, if you have too many different laws, it'll cause confusion. So then again, you got to be able to strike that balance. Next, he says expansion, which is external and relative, should always be subordinate to contraction, which is internal and absolute. So when somebody wants to expand, it's always due to something like on the outside, and it's relative to what's around. But contraction is something that's more, focused on what's going on inside. I think that's what he means. If that's not what he was getting at, let me know in the comment, but I feel like that's what he was saying. Next, this is a quote. He says, it's better to count the vigor of good government than the resources a great territory furnishes. So basically what he's saying is, it's better to, have people with basically like good morals and good values and stuff in government. And that's how you define a good government versus how big the empire itself is, because that doesn't necessarily equate to, proper legislator and proper leadership. All right, and the last one from the parts the people. He says a body politic is measured in two ways. It's measured in the number of people and and land. And he says the land should only be enough. There should only be enough land for the amount of people. So if it says too much land for the amount of people you have, then it's too hard to guard. But if it's too little, then obviously it won't be able to sustain the amount of people. And it said there is no general ratio, because all the situations are different. Like if you're living in an area where the land is very fertile versus if you're living in a land where it's very barren, or if you're living in the mountains, or if you're living by the water. All of that stuff matters when you're talking about the ratio of land to people. And then part 11 is called the various systems of legislation. And that was kind of that last thing I said kind of leads into this point. This is something I thought was interesting. He said if you live on barren land, then you should focus on crafts and things, because there isn't enough food and stuff to go around. So if you focus on crafts, it'll give you a way to trade and barter. Everybody will have what they need. But it said if you live on fertile land, then you should focus on agriculture, because that'll push the push the civilization forward. And then he says, every nation has in itself something that gives them a particular application, and that's what makes the legislation particularly its own. So one thing he did say in these series of parts that I didn't mention, it was like every legislation is going to be slightly different, but just because of the way that it's that land or like that group of people is set up. Like every legislation or government isn't going to be exactly the same. So, and he gave some examples, and I just thought these were really interesting. He says, so the Arabs have religion. The Athenians, they had letters. Carthage and Tyre, Tyre, I don't know how to say it. It might be Tyre or Tyre. But they had commerce and they had commerce. And they said the land of roads, they had shipping. It says Sparta's thing was war. And Rome was a land that they focused on virtue, right? So that's part 2 of The Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Come back next week. I will have part 3 for y'all, man. If you haven't, go look at part 1, and then just check out some of my other videos, man. Hit subscribe, bro. I'm all about, you know what I'm saying, just learning and sharing the knowledge I gain. That's really what my channel is all about. Like I said, I do stock breakdowns. I review books. I do just a little podcast type thing where I just dump my brain out on like Friday or Saturday, whichever day I record the video. And I read the Bible and I just share what things I'm getting from the Bible. So yeah, man, tune in for any one of those, anything that pique your interest, and I'm out.